There have been many skills that I've learned here at Ndakinna, from the scats and tracks, knowing how to find and track an animal and which animal that you're tracking, from what woods to use to start a fire, and just numerous skills that would help you survive in the wilderness.
There are lots of ways, of course, to keep track of our own location when we're in the woods. A big part of being in nature is knowing where you are, where you want to be. And one of the oldest ways to keep track of where you are is through the use of the sun. Now, being the winter months, being in the northern hemisphere, the sun travels visibly lower in the southern part of the sky. So that's a very good reference point for us as we're traveling along. We get a pretty good idea throughout a good chunk of the day where south is, by that sun being low in the southern sky. Now, of course, one of the things people talk about when they talk about telling where you are, direction, using the woods, people often talk about moss. And of course, when you talk about the old tale about moss, people will say that moss only grows on the north side of the tree. True or false? Well, pretty false, because right here, this part of the tree is facing the south. The truth to it is, moss prefers to grow on the shaded side of the tree. It will grow thicker and higher on the shaded side of the tree. So you will get moss on the southern side, but if we look at this tree, the moss is quite a bit higher and thicker on the shaded side, which a lot of the time is going to be to the north. Along with the sun, another way that we can figure out where we are is using the moon, the night traveler. And of course, sometimes we're lucky enough to have the moon out during the day as well, especially on a nice clear day like today. And any time you have a partially shaded moon, especially a crescent moon, but even partway shaded, if you connect the top of the shaded area with the bottom, waxing and waning moons work the same. Make an imaginary line down towards the horizon. Where that line hits the horizon is pretty close to due south.
The animal tracking was something that personally I struggled with a little bit. I thought that it's interesting, definitely learning about it on the, the dry erase board, but then applying the knowledge out in the field is something that I can definitely see if I practiced enough I'd become comfortable with, but for the first time it was difficult to make out certain tracks. I think a lot of them look similar, but I like a challenge, and I think it's something that if I continued to do in the future, I could get. And obviously it's very dependent on the conditions, the snow, but it was really interesting to see Jim's expertise in pointing out all the different tracks, and I am really impressed at how knowledgeable he is at identifying tracks and animals. And
yes. All right, we got something cool here. It's a little bit washed out from the melting and some rain we had the other day, but we have some ermine tracks. We have a signature 2x loping pattern. You'll see quite a bit, especially when the snow gets a little bit deeper, because this is a long-bodied animal with short legs. So it loped here, 2x, 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 2x. And if you look close, you can actually make out the 5 toes. So there are actually 4 tracks in each one of these holes. All right, so here we have a deer doing a typical diagonal walking pattern, very common symmetrical gait. And in the wintertime, one of the most common gaits they're going to use doesn't use a lot of energy. Okay, these deer need to conserve their energy for nighttime to keep themselves warm. And the nice thing about when you catch any animal in a walking pattern, you can get a general idea how big this animal is from the hip to shoulder. And the stride is about 1.1, about 1.25 the hip to shoulder length of that animal. So when you measure same foot to same foot, that's the way you always measure the stride. From here to here, right about there, we get about 32 inches. If you hold that up, it's about that long, which of course any of you can, if you visualize a deer, that makes sense. That's about the hip to shoulder length of a deer. And as we travel along, it's real good to gather things that may be useful. All around the ground over there, we saw some of these broken branches with dead pine needles on them. And dead pine needles are very flammable, especially when you use an open flame to them. So this is something we're going to want to gather to help us when we make our fire. So we'll keep a hold of that, gather some as we go. Also right here we have some dried dead leaves on this beech tree. And different types of trees, from beech to oak, will often keep the dead leaves throughout the winter, which is very useful for natural insulation as well as for fires. If you happen to get dead branches towards the bottom, real squiggly looking branches like here, very good for making fire. In fact, these are some of the first, this is the first layer of kindling that I like to lay on top of the actual flame that I create. When talking about fire, it's hard not to mention birch bark. It lights even when it's wet. So this right here is yellow birch, and if you gather enough of this, it'll ignite to an open flame. If you strip it thin enough, it will also ignite to a spark. Now, if you're in the Adirondack Park, you have to be careful because it's actually illegal to peel bark off live trees. However, being in the foothills, if you do it in the correct way, you're not hurting the tree. So it is legal in the foothills regions outside of the actual park. But of course, in a survival situation, hopefully people make the right decision if their life depends on it. Nice thing when you find wetlands are the various plants, such as the cattail here, which has many different uses. Cattail is a great plant. Throughout the year, it has an edible root. You could actually go down underneath the snow here and find edible shoots. And right here, though, we have an old cattail, which has some other uses. If you break this open, it's really fluffy inside. This is a really good natural insulator. It actually has wicking properties. So you could stuff your gloves. In fact, we had cases where kids came here with cotton socks and their feet were getting cold. We tossed out their cotton socks and just stuffed their boots with cattail down. It helped keep them warm for the rest of the day. So this is a little bit older cattail. We're going to find one that's a little bit fluffier for the other use, one of my favorite uses, which is in fire making.
Yeah, I always kind of knew that you needed like dry, flammable stuff to make a fire. I never knew that cattails were like a good fire starter. One of the most surprising things that I learned here at Ndakinna was how to build a fire. So I've tried to build fires much more, using more natural methods or spark method, not just like matches when I'm camping, and I really haven't done it successfully in the past, and learning how to do that here was surprising because it surprised me how easy it was when you actually do it correctly.
Right now I'm going to do a quick demonstration for you, which is going to come in real handy when you all try to make your own spark-based fire. And the technology we're going to be using today is actually a combination of some more modern technology and ancient technology. We have a spark-based method here, which of course flint and steel is an older method. But of course, since we have the addition of a little bit of magnesium in here, it gives a real nice spark. But of course, one of the problems people run into in the wilderness is often they don't know what to light. Maybe they don't have one of those synthetic methods with them to light. So we're going to show how you can use these cattails to help get a fire going. And what you do is you take these cattails, the fluffier the better, you break them open. So there's a nice fluff ball right there. And look at that one, breaks right open. This is going to work real good. This alone in the winter months can get a nice flame going. But what I'm going to do with this, save a little for later just in case, is work in some of those strips of birch bark, and of course pine needles as well. This can work alone with any of these, but if you do a variety of things in here, extra chance it's going to light and stay lit. And you want to lightly disperse all of these materials into the cattail. The bark, birch bark, is really going to be your main source of keeping this flame going. The thinner the bark, the better. And you're going to have your squiggly sticks all ready to add on top here. We're really going to just go for the flame here today and not keep a full fire going. But it's understanding the principle that's important. Yellow birch works good, but really thin paper birch works even better. So this is just about right for demonstration purposes. And there you go. And then I would, of course, add materials on top. You can actually stir it up with a stick, and I can add more and more. If we were really keeping this going, I would have kindling of all different sizes that I would add on the top. But as you can see, one spark got this lit, and I would just add more and more fuel to this fire, and I could keep it going as long as I wanted to. That's a shelter I made this last summer. This is a nice example of a real quick, basic survival shelter, utilizing something nature provided for us. So this is a down tree, which of course we made sure was nice and secure before we started on the shelter. And then we made a rib work off the back at an angle. And then we covered that rib work with dry leaves. Of course, this time of year you cover it with hemlock boughs. And if we were using this time of year that is, all of these hemlock boughs on this tree here would be real nice to use. You would just line the bottom of the shelter with up to a foot of hemlock boughs. And then you could have a nice fire right in front here and you'd be set for the night.
I have to say one of my favorite skills was the fire building. How to collect tinder and what kind of wood to use for the spindle and the fireboard, and how to get a good fire going.
I thought the group bow drill was an interesting team building experience. I thought it was really difficult.
It took our group a long time, and Jim needed to help us quite a bit.
How even though you're tired and you want to give up, just keep on going. It's right when you don't think it's gonna work, that's when you get a call and that's when you make your fire.
That it's about the timing of the bow and the pressure on the handpiece and the stability of the footpiece, and it definitely takes a lot of coordination, a lot of communication. Definitely the importance of having good tinder and persistence. You know, there's a chance that you might not get it the first time. Don't get frustrated, don't give up.
It was awesome to see the entire team like working together to build a fire and have that sort of experience. It was also, it was cool to see when you get the right combination of people, the right combination of like the bow and everything just working together. It's kind of like one of those sweet moments where everything just comes together and then it bursts into flame.
There you go, guys. Woo! Good job. You guys did it.